Hello everyone and welcome to Split Second. This week we have another match of last week's pod with our fellow patron Dante. We have the same decks. Diogo is on his Tymna and Dargo, Dante is on his Simic Doom tree and deck around Psychic Pickpocket. Bal is on Wash Rotom's Joyra Storm list and Rodrigo is piloting Monza's Beamtown Bullies. Diogo is going first and he mulligan once, keeping a Plains and Windswept Heath for lands, with a Mana Vault for ramp. Impulsive Pilfer is great fodder for the Dargo loops, and he has Gamble and Diabolic Intent to pivot his game plan. Damned can get rid of a single stacks piece or the whole board. Dante mulligan to 6, keeping a Forest and Sun-Scorched Desert, which is one of his backup win cons. Lotus Petal and Mox Diamond can ramp and combine with Summerwald Sage can allow him for a turn to Kodama if he finds a land. Cyclonic Rift, similarly to Dam, can get rid of a single stacks piece or the whole opposing board, and he bottom Flusterstorm. Bal mulligan once, hoping to find a land like this, allowing for a turn to Joyra, Ancient Tomb and Arid Mesa for lands with a Fellwar Stone for ramp. Pirate Spellbomb can serve as removal as can Resculpt. The deck is on Breach and he has already Brain Freeze, and Paradoxical Outcome is quite a great draw engine in this deck. Finally, Rodrigo also mulligan once, finding a Swamp and Windswept Heath for lands, with an Abrupt Decay for removal, Veil of Summer for protection and 3 tutors, a Demonic, and even more Diabolical, and one you never know what to expect. Ready for the match? Diogo starts the game with a Windswept Heath, cracking it for his Scrubland, and then casts his Mana Vault, passing the turn. Dante draws, plays a Sun-Scorched Desert, and pings Diogo with it as he is on Ad Naus. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Forest, and then casts his Lotus Petal. He is not done just yet, as he casts Summerwald Sage, and then he finishes the turn. Bal draws, plays an Ancient Tomb, and then casts a top deck Talisman of Creativity, passing the turn. Rodrigo plays a Windswept Heath and cracks it for a Taiga to cast his Gamble right away. He searches for a Mana Crypt and randomly discards a Pyroblast he had just drawn. He casts the Mana Crypt and passes. Diogo was expecting to draw a red source, but he didn't, so he plays a Plains and casts Demonic Tutor to find a Blood Crypt into his hand, passing afterwards. Dante gets to his turn and found the land he needed, a Wooded Foothills, that he cracks for a Tropical Island, so he can cast his commander Kodama and passes the turn. Bal draws and plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Artificer, which the deck has more than humans at the current state. He casts Joyra and passes the turn. Rodrigo gets to his turn and is safe from his crit roll. He plays a Swamp and just passes the turn. We are back to Diogo and everything went according to his plans. He plays an untapped Blood Crypt and then casts an overloaded Damned, wiping the board of 2 commanders from commander-centric decks. Dante actually leaves the Kodama in his graveyard, hoping to recoup it easily with a Noxus Revival. Diogo then casts a Strike It Reach, creating a treasure and cracks it to cast Impulsive Pilferer, ending his turn. Dante got really set behind with his 1, so he casts a Fellwar Stone and passes with 2 cards in hand. Bal plays an Arid Mesa and casts an uncounterable Ethereum Sculptor. Then, with the floating mana, he casts a Fellwar Stone, hoping to recoup enough mana to recast Joyra next turn. Rodrigo rolls and is once again safe from his crypt. Rodrigo's plans also went according to his wish. He casts a Demonic Tutor and Bal takes the opportunity to crack his fetch for a Volcanic Island. Rodrigo then searches for a Dockside Extortionist, which he casts right away, entering and creating 6 treasures. With 4 of those, he casts his commander, the Beamtown Bullies, and goes into combat. Not wanting to allow Diogo to shump block and gain a treasure with the Pilferer, he sends the Bullies towards Bal and then passes the turn. Dante brings up that Pilferer could be used as fodder for sacrificial spells, but it's a bit too late as Diogo gets to his turn, takes 1 damage from the vault and thus casts his Diabolic Intent, sacrificing his Pilferer as an additional cost and searching for his own Dockside Extortionist. He casts it, entering, and in response to the trigger, Rodrigo cracks his 2 treasures for Golgari mana. Diogo creates 6 treasures, and cracks 1 to cast his commander Dargo, also sacrificing his Mana Vault as an additional cost. He now casts a Gamble. He searches for a Ruthless Technomancer, and Bal hopes to entomb it, but he hits the Cabal Ritual. He casts the Technomancer, and with its trigger on the stack, Dante responds and casts a Baby Rift on the Dargo, hoping to prevent what appears to be a Dockside loop. Diogo's last card in hand was an Altar of Dementia, and Dante just saved the board there. Diogo sacrifices Dockside, gaining a treasure and passes the turn, hoping to go at it again next turn. Before losing his mana, Rodrigo spends it to cast an Abrupt Decay on Bal's Ethereum Sculptor, and we're back to Dante's turn. He is still struggling with his mana, and he casts a Fight Rigging, looking at the top 5 cards and exiling a Sakashima the Imposter. He still plays the Polluted Delta he drew, and passes the turn. In his end step to be mana efficient, Bal casts a Resculpt on the Beamtown Bullies before going to his turn. He just draws and recasts his Joyra, hoping she survives a turn cycle. Rodrigo is still on the safe side of the coin flip. He draws and casts a professional Facebreaker. He jumps to combat, sending Dockside towards Dante and the Elemental towards Bal, triggering Facebreaker for 2 treasures. In his second main phase, he casts an Imperial Seal, searching for an Entomb, which he can cast through the Facebreaker if needed. We're back to Diogo. Will he try to go at it again? He also drew a Facebreaker, and he mimics Rodrigo jumping into combat, sending Dargo towards Rodrigo and the Techno guy at Dante for 2 treasures from Facebreaker. Without further actions, he passes. Dante draws and starts regretting having left Kodama in the yard as he passes. Bal is glad to have untapped with Joyra. He casts a Pirate Spell Bomb, triggering Joyra for a draw. He casts a Mox Opal, triggering Joyra and drawing. Considering Rodrigo and Diogo both tutored a lot, he figures he must try to storm off now, or he won't have another chance. He floats some mana to then cast Paradoxical Outcome, bouncing 4 artifacts, drawing 4 cards. He is desperately looking for a cost reducer, but not finding it. He recasts Mox Opal, triggering Joyra for another draw. He now plays an island and then casts Felor Stone, triggering Joyra for another draw. Now he casts Talisman of Creativity for another Joyra trigger, regaining Metalcraft, and follows it with Pirate Spell Bomb for another draw. However, he whiffed with just 1 mana left, so he's forced to discard 4 at cleanup and pass. Rodrigo finally loses his first crit roll. He goes straight into combat, sending Dockside at Dante, Facebreaker at Diogo and the Elemental at Bal, creating 3 treasures through the Facebreaker. In his second main phase, he recasts his commander, the Beamtown Bullies, and passes the turn, advising Diogo to tread carefully. Diogo slowly reaches to draw, asking if he can, and Rodrigo allows it. He plays a Plateau and then goes into combat, sending Facebreaker towards Bal, Technomancer towards Dante and Dargo towards Rodrigo for the second time. Facebreaker triggers and he creates 3 treasures. He then activates Technomancer, sacrificing a treasure to attempt to return Dockside from his graveyard to play. In response though, Rodrigo casts his Entomb and finds Leveler into his graveyard. He then activates the Beamtown Bullies to put Leveler into play under Diogo's control, which triggers to exile his whole library. Diogo is still pretty chill about it, as he now casts Altar of Dementia, which still does the work of milling his opponents, and they would die before he even gets to draw again. However, Bal responds with a Pact of Negation, saving the table this time. Diogo still casts Tymna before passing. Dante draws and plays an Ancient Tomb, and then casts Sakashima of 1000 Faces, just to have a blocker as well as to slowly get access to the card exile through Fight Rigging, as it triggers in the beginning of combat and puts a counter on Sakashima. He then ends his turn, and in the end step, Bal Chain of Vapors his own Mox Opal, hoping to dig further. Bal untaps and pays for the Pact. He draws and exclaims at the top deck, Polluted Delta, which he cracks for an island. He then casts his Mox Opal, triggering Joyra for a draw. He now casts a Phyrexian Metamorph, triggering Joyra, but in response to that, Rodrigo casts a Veil of Summer, which cancels Bal's plans of hoping to brain freeze Rodrigo and Dante to death, so Bal responds with a Flusterstorm. He then draws and Metamorph enters as a copy of Dockside Extortionist. Despite being outside of the game, Diogo cracks his treasures not to make it easy, and Bal creates 4 treasures total. Being 1 mana short, he can't go for Displacer Kitten, so he casts Underworld Breach, and with the last 2 treasures he escapes Brain Freeze, targeting himself with a storm count of 5, so he mills himself 18. However, he only found a Jewel Lotus as a free spell, which he escapes to draw another card from Joyra, but it's not it. He proceeds to end step, sacrificing Underworld Breach and passes. Rodrigo rolls and takes no damage from the Crypt. He goes into combat and sends Facebreaker towards Dante, Elemental towards Bal and the Beamtown Bullies towards Diogo, hoping to generate some more treasure from Facebreaker, but Diogo does block the Bullies and Bal champs the Elemental to deprive Rodrigo of some treasures. He then plays a Gemstone Caverns and finally casts his Diabolic Intent, sacrificing his Dockside as an additional cost to find Necropotence. He now casts a Finale of Devastation X equals 2, returning Dockside from his graveyard to play, creating 8 treasures, as Bal doesn't want to crack his Lotus. With 3 of those, Rodrigo casts his tutored Necropotence, and it resolves, so he pays 7 life to exile 7 cards and proceeds to his end step, putting them into his hand. Now, Bal points out he can't even brain freeze him, and this play just served 2 purposes. Diogo, who is having a snack, finally comes to swipe his board as he loses attempting to draw from an empty library. Dante draws and plays an Urza Saga, entering and gaining its first ability. He goes to combat and triggers Fight Rigging, putting another counter on his Sakashima, and despite the Necropotence, he decides to pass as Bal is still threatening. Bal untaps, draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. Since he's out of protection, he casts a Mystic Remora, and then follows it with a Displacer Kitten, However, in response, Rodrigo fires a Tybalt's Trickery, triggering Remora and Unable to Pay. In response, Bal fires a Brainstorm, hoping to find protection and ditching 2 lands to the top. Tybalt's Trickery resolves and the random number is a 2, so Bal mills the 2 lands he had put there and then reveals a Lotus Petal right away, which he casts, triggering Jhoira for a draw. He found a Mana Creep that he also casts, triggering Jhoira for another draw. But in response, Rodrigo desperately activates Facebreaker, cracking 1 treasure at a time, hoping to find some responses, but he finds none, so Bal draws and Crypt resolves. He then goes for the backup plan, casting Mystic Forge, triggering Jhoira for another draw. He now cracks his Scalding Tarn for an untapped Steam Vents, as he has no more islands, and proceeds to cast Transmute Artifact, searching for a Cloud Key, sacrificing a Talisman of Creativity and cracking the Petal for the last mana. The key enters and he chooses Artifacts, so he now shows he had drawn Sense's Divining Top earlier and cast it for 0 mana, drawing a card from Jhoira. The top card is already what he was looking for, Codex Shredder, which will be his way to retrieve Underworld Breach from his graveyard to his hand, so he now only needs mana for that and starts looping Sense's Divining Top by activating it to draw a card, and then casting it for free from the top of his library due to Mystic Forge and Cloud Key. He now casts Lion's Eye Diamond, drawing another card and does crack it now for triple red mana, hoping to find more fast mana, repeating the top and Mystic Forge loop. He eventually finds Birgi, which he proceeds to cast, drawing another card, and the Sensei's top loop now generates the mana he needed. Once he has enough mana to crack Codex Shredder, he returns Underworld Breach from his graveyard to his hand and casts it. He is now able to escape Lotus Petal for colored mana to then escape Brain Freeze, targeting his opponents. He escapes Cyclonic Rift on Necropotence, so he can pass with protection up, and Rodrigo and Dante both lose as they attempt to draw from their empty libraries. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. This match was heavily influenced by the early commanders being wrathed by Damned, and the Jhoira had the most ramp to recoup other than Dante. Rodrigo also got his commander set behind 1 turn, and the constant attempts from Diogo at winning made him the premier target for Rodrigo to level her out of the game, leaving a window for Bal to try to go at it again, with Displacer Kitten, Underworld Breach and ultimately Mystic Forge. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rap, Mike Purr, Aajimo, Drunken House Cat, V, RJ, Heated Chill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katarina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt, Wicked and Zinan, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.